Ok. Estás live.
Hello guys, so thanks for coming. Thanks Vito for organizing the so yeah, today we talk about Universal. First, just a little bit about me. My name is João. I'm a web developer. I work from Lisbon. I work for a company in Vienna. We mainly do Drupal development, which is PHP CMS. In my free time, I play a lot with Angular, and I just have a little bit of fun with Angular stuff. So at my work, I don't really do Angular, but I explore a lot of it in my free time. These are just some links for my Meetup profile on Twitter, and I will share the slides afterwards. You guys can find this. So yeah, we will talk about Universal. First, before we really dive into the platform and what it does, I just want to kind of analyze a little bit what we have been doing in the web for the last years, where we're coming from, and where we're kind of going with the apps that we are building today. So a couple of years ago, we were all kind of doing the same apps, which today we call server-rendered apps, but at the time we didn't really call it anything. It was just how the web was. Mainly what it means is that when you go to URL, what the browser receives is a full-blown HTML document that has everything in it. It's all the HTML, it has the CSS. It then has some script in the end that just kind of enhances a little bit the page, but doesn't really have a major role in the website. So the server really is the one controlling the whole process. Is the one that does the rendering. The browser has kind of a passive role in all of this, and there's really no JavaScript that's needed to present the page and to have the page working. This was how it was. And today we all are here because we are doing single page apps. That's what Angular is really for and what is great about it. And we all love it, but things work a little bit different in single page apps. So this is typically what you see when you get a request from the server. You see this little tag that contains really no content at all, and then a script that is really the major player in the process. So the script takes that little tag, and it's the one that's going to transform that tag into an actual HTML document. JavaScript is the one that's responsible for doing the rendering, is the one that's responsible for doing the routing and all of these things. This typically means that our startup time becomes a little bit slower. The more our app grows, the slower it gets, because there's more JavaScript involved, and the browser has to parse this JavaScript, which can become a little bit slower. But then after that initial kind of hurdle, things get a lot snappier, and that's kind of why we love it. It's because you go from one page to the other, there's no full refresh needed, it's a lot snappier, and it allows for animations between routing and things like that. That's why it became so famous. In the last, I guess, 2 or 3 years, people have been questioning a little bit about this process, and if we should take a little bit of a step back into the previous version, the server rendered version, so that at the initial time you get that full HTML document. But why? What are we losing from that server rendering page that we don't have with client side, and can we kind of bridge the gap between the two? And why that is important. I think there are mainly 3 things that are specifically important for this, and why server rendering is becoming kind of a hot topic in the JavaScript community. The first one is SEO. So for SEO, you guys are doing mainly Angular 1, I guess, or also in Angular 2. This is also the hot topic. It can become a little bit tricky to handle difficult SEO cases. With SEO, typically we are dealing with meta tags that we put in the head of the document, but also in in the document itself. Things like title and meta descriptions, canonical URLs, and actual content as well, because content is a really big part of SEO. And the important thing with this is that the crawlers, who are like the agents that analyze your page for SEO performance, they really care about the content. And as we saw, that little app tag, it really contains nothing, and it tells nothing about the page. So the crawler needs to parse all the JavaScript and do all of that work that I talked about in the beginning, so that you can actually read the content of the page and analyze the SEO. And some crawlers, Google does a good job at parsing JavaScript, but some crawlers like Bing and Yahoo, they don't do it well enough, so this can quickly become a very big issue. There are some solutions to handle this. There are services like prerender.io or some other kind of solutions that you basically provide like a snapshot of the page to the crawlers. So you don't provide the page that the user actually sees, but you provide like a snapshot that contains all the HTML and the meta tags. But these are really kind of workarounds. They're not really a perfect solution for the problem. The real solution is still today to have something rendered from the server directly, so that the crawler can parse it correctly. The second thing is social media. So with social media, typically what we're used to is we put a link into some social media like Facebook or Twitter, and we get this nice presentation like a card or a model window that presents our site in a nice way, puts the nice image in there, and this is done with what's called scrapers. They typically don't care as much about the content, but more about how to present certain things on the page. Usually this is more or less what it looks like on an Angular 1 app, where there's no, if the scraper is not able to run JavaScript, this is kind of what happens. There's nothing there basically, because it just gets that app tag and that's basically there's nothing. How you do this is typically with specific protocols. This is an example of Twitter. You just put some meta tags in the edit document. And once you share that link on Twitter, you get a nice card or a nice, it depends on what you specify. But if the scraper doesn't run JavaScript, so if the scraper is not able to get these tags correctly, and these change obviously from URL to URL, if it's not able to do it, it's not able to get this nice presentation of the document. So these two topics that I talked about, they are kind of specific. You might be thinking like, okay, I'm doing like an internal system. We don't really care about social media, or it's not really SEO relevant to the page that we're doing because we use it internally or something like that. But this one really applies to all apps. And when I'm talking about user experience, I'm mostly talking about performance and startup time, which is really like the main issue that has arisen with single page apps. The thing is, like I've talked with, the larger the bundles, the initial time gets longer and longer. The time that you can actually start using the app becomes longer and longer, and this can quickly become a very, very long time. This is typically what you see in the first 3 or 4 seconds of a single page application. Google has made a study about this loading screen in single page applications, and the results are kind of baffling. So 53% of the people will abandon the site if it takes longer than 3 seconds to load. And what they've discovered is that it takes way longer than that for most sites. So the average on a website to load on 3G is 19 seconds, which is crazy long, and also for Angular apps. But Angular 2 is out, and Angular 2 is fast, and it really is fast. It is really optimized for performance, and it includes things like ahead of time compilation, which significantly decreases the time that the browser has to do this heavy job of parsing the JavaScript. Things like lazy loading combined with preloading, and then these are really smart techniques that we can use and very easily to improve our startup time. But there is still some room for improvement. And one of the places where there's this big gap and it's not yet completely solved is between the HTML load and the Angular bootstrap. So the time between the browser gets the HTML document from the server and the time that Angular has to process, or the browser has to process the Angular code, parse it, run it, this can take some time. So there are two important metrics in this. One is the time for meaningful paint, which means it's the time that the user can actually see something on the page. It's not interactive. It's not, the page is just statically rendered. It's just presented to the user. And then there's another point, which is when the app actually becomes interactive. You can navigate, you can toggle menus, and it's fully functional. This is more or less what it looks like in both scenarios. So on a normal scenario, this is what it looks like. The HTML document is loaded. That can take, depends on the server, but it takes usually just 1 or 2 seconds, not more than that. And then the user gets presented with this loading screen. At that point, JavaScript starts to parse, the Angular starts to bootstrap, and when it finishes bootstrap, we get an interactive page. It's fully rendered, the user can navigate, can do it. On the server, what happens is that point where we normally would present the loading screen, we present actual content to the user. So it's not interactive, it's just like a paint, basically. And just like before, Angular needs to bootstrap, the browser needs to process the JavaScript, that still needs to be done, and at that point, we get an interactive page. So the only difference really is to replace that loading screen with actual content. Not interactive content, but just something for the user to see. But these are just, blue lines and red lines, so how fast, how slow is this? This is an Angular 2 app which was made in the previous versions of Angular. So this was still, I think, in like RC or something like that. But the numbers don't change all that much. What we see here is what happens normally when the user is loading the page. So at 206 milliseconds, there's nothing, and then there's still nothing. At 4.5 seconds, something starts to show up. And when something starts to show up, typically when you don't do server rendering, everything comes up at once. Everything happens at the same time. There's the loading screen, and then everything happens. So, but still, it's more than 4 seconds to load to do app. It's kind of crazy. This is the same app, but with server rendering. So at 490 milliseconds, there's already content on the page. It's not interactive again, so you cannot uncheck to-dos or add to-dos. You cannot basically do anything, but you can read the content. And the time is significantly different from 4 seconds to 490 milliseconds. Like I said, this is previously to RC maybe even, or the first RC, so the times change a little bit, but this is from the documentation side. So the Angular core team did a test on the Tour of Heroes app, which is like the kitchen sink application for Angular 2. And this was done on an uncached page, so no cache at all, just to see how the times are different. You can see in JIT mode it takes 30 seconds to load. In AOT that significantly decreases to 5.5 seconds. And with Universal it takes 0.4 seconds. And this is again the paint. This is not about the time that the app becomes live and functional and interactive, because that time doesn't really change from one to the other. It's just that first time that the user can see the content and can start reading it, these signs refer to that. So, but what's the solution for it? How can we, achieve this without doing 2 apps or doing a crazy amount of work to really change? Because what we really want is an app that works on the server and that works on the client. And ideally, we don't want to write 2 apps, right? We want to write 1 app. It's like I said, good for these 3 reasons. That's the most. I think those are the three key points for considering server.
We go back to the slide.
Yeah. It's the same 3 topics that I mentioned before. So user experience, SEO, and social media. And to kind of solve this problem that we don't want to write 2 different apps and we don't want to write a lot of boilerplate to really handle this, this is where universal rendering comes into place. This is not unique to Angular. So this concept came before Angular 2 was released. In React, this is a very common pattern, which is basically writing 1 app that can be used on the server and on the client. So universal rendering is just a concept or a pattern to write an app that will work on multiple environments. The concept is even bigger than browser and server, so it could be that the same app would work on browser, server, and native script, for example, or anything else, web workers. This, again, allows you to write the same code, only 1 code, manage 1 code, and run the app both on the browser and the server, for this case. The same app, so nothing really different to manage. And this will allow you to have a much better performance, to have that SEO compliance, to be able to rely on Angular to do all of this SEO specific, because there's a lot into SEO. It's not a very simple thing to achieve. And social media. So for Angular 2, the project that allows you to do this is called Angular Universal. It is an open source project. It was started by Patrick JS and Jeff Welpley, and then some other people who came in and helped on it. The idea is really to have server rendering on the app with as minimal changes to the app as possible. So you could even have an app that works solely on the browser. You develop it for the browser. You're not thinking about this, and in, I would say, even 1 day you can have your app running on the server. It's really simple. Or the idea is simple. And this is possible mainly because the Angular 2 made a decision to separate the application layer from the rendering layer, which allows you to then run the app on the server or as parts of the app as a web worker or on the browser or native script. It allows all kinds of things to happen. So the initial effort for the project, for the open source project, was to really provide the full solution to do this. So provide everything you need to have Angular running on the server. In Angular 4, the core team decided that since there was so much movement going on into Angular Universal, it was kind of hard to keep track with all the changes that were happening in core. They decided it's easier if the core team handles the universal support. And basically they took over the project. The open source project still remains, but it has a different role. And the role is to provide a good or a simple way to handle all the different kind of platforms that you might be on. So you might be on Node and you're using Express, or you might be on Node and you're using Happy.js, or .NET, or Java, or PHP. At this point, I think Node.js are the ones that are more stable or ready to use, because it's just simple, it's JavaScript, so it was simpler to develop those. .NET is I think, quite stable to use from what I hear on the Slack channels and on the GitHub repository. Java and PHP, I think they're still in heavy development, so, and there might be more coming in. So, and in Angular 4.x, so what's the core team? Assume the project. This lives in a package called platform server. Similar, I don't know. Are you guys using Angular 2 or fairly familiar with Angular 2? Really, more or less. So in Angular 2, there's a package called platform browser. That's the one where you get the bootstrap from and where normally you take things from for a normal app. And now there's one called platform server. And this is the one that handles server rendering. So at its core, server rendering is just really about taking an app and putting a string out. It's really just that. That's the whole kind of magic behind it. So there's a method in this package, Angular platform server, which is called render module factory, which basically takes an app, a precompiled app module. This would be your root module, and it just reads some index file, which is that file that contains like the app tag. It contains just normally the tag that will launch everything, and it returns a promise with the string, and that's basically it. This is the core of it. Of course, there's some sugar syntax on top of it, because what do you do with the string? We want to handle routing and all these things. So. Angular Universal, I am only familiar with the Express one, so I'm going to show this one, but for the others, I don't think the change is that big. There's one specific part where I'm going to mention where this might be different if you're on .NET or PHP, but the first parts are really the same. So previously on a normal Angular app, the ones that we all doing, you have an app root module. You have the root module that kind of kicks everything on, and you bootstrap that module. This is normally what it looks like. It's just an ng module. It has an app component, which is the root component, where it's the one that you bootstrap. It just imports the browser module. This is kind of it. Of course, obviously, you might import some other things that you have, services and whatnot, but this is kind of what it looks like. For server rendering, things are a little bit different. You have mainly two entries. So you have one entry which is the browser, and then you have another one which is the server. So this app root module kind of splits up into two modules. That's more or less the change that you would have to do on a normal app. So the browser module looks like this. It's really, really similar to the previous one. We import the app module, which is the root module. The difference here is that it bootstraps here an app component, because you have your app root module and it splits into two. So this is the one that's going to get bootstrapped, this module here, browser app module. So let's say if you have an Angular app that's just running on the browser and you want to do server rendering now you decide that you want to do some server rendering. What you do is you put another ng module on top, which is this one, and it has this specific thing in here. It imports the browser module just like before, but it does this with server transition, and you give it an app ID. I'm going to explain what this is for in a minute. The server has a new ng module, which is called the server module. So here on the server entries, again, very similar. The only difference to the previous one is that you import this one also, the server module. And you do the same thing with the browser module with server transition. This is because when you do the server rendering, Angular is going to make sure that the prefixes for the components are going to stay the same from the server to the browser, so that the transition is like clean, there's no re-rendering. So all the styles will be prefixed the same, everything will be prefixed the same. The server module also does some other things, like providing some implementation for HTTP, for example, or location, things that work differently on the browser and on the server, and the server module that handles that. So you just use the HTTP module just like you use normally, You don't have to do anything. This server module is the one that's going to handle the implementation details for the server, so that you don't have to change anything. Again, it ensures that the same prefixes are done. This is important for CSS and for the DOM itself, so that it's not re-rendered. Because if the prefixes are different, it's going to think that it needs to paint things again. And once the browser kicks in, you want to, like, the page should remain, it shouldn't re-render itself. So this is the part that's really different when you're on .NET or PHP or Node. This is the part that gets different. The bootstrapping. So I'm not sure if anyone familiar with Express? No. A bit. So this kind of looks familiar, right? It's not. This is just a typical Express implementation. And if you're on .NET, I don't know how it looks like, but it's probably going to look similar as well. And in PHP the same. The only difference for Express is this, that this ng Express engine, this is provided by the universal open source package. And it's just going to bootstrap that server module we declared before. It then can handle the routing and all of that, but that's really just, it handles it in the same way. You don't have to change anything. All the routing definitions, all the HTTP requests, every guard that you do, everything that you do normally in an app, they will work. This is basically the work that you need to do. And this is because, again, that method that we saw, it just renders a string, but that's not really what we want. What we want is an actual server running. So this is what handles that. So the process of transitioning from the server to the client. So the server does this static version, and the browser does the highly interactive part. So what we want really is to have the server paint that static feature, and then once the browser kicks in, it becomes the single page app we've always used. So nothing changes. It's going to be a single page app all the same. The pre-rendering or the universal rendering is just static HTML and CSS, so it's just like a better loading. And this is kind of the steps that it takes to achieve that. The server takes the app and it renders a string from that app and it serves it to the browser. It serves that version to the browser. Then the client is going to bootstrap, but it's going to bootstrap intelligently, let's say it like that, because it knows all the prefixes already. They will be the same, so it's not going to repaint anything that's needed. It's going to know that the page that we got from the server is the same, and it's going to do a swap of the view. That means that it's going to replace the server view with the browser view where it's needed. If nothing changes from the server view to the client view, it's not going to swap anything. But it might be that you have pieces of code that really just run on the browser, and then it's going to put those in or replace the server ones with the browser. We're going to take a look at some of these cases. So when you're doing universal, and at the beginning everything is really clean, it's really easy to get started with Angular universal, but then in the middle of the process, there are some key things to watch out for. The first one, of course, is the DOM, so the HTML, the document object that the browser supports that doesn't exist on the server. So anything that you do like window.something, document.something, or navigator.something that doesn't exist on the server, so you just cannot use those. But it might happen that you need to use those at some point. And this is normally how you handle it. So Angular Common here provides two methods that are useful for this. One is platform browser and the other one is platform server. So if you have some specific client code that you really need to run, you can put it inside this if statement and it's only going to run on the browser. And that's when the browser, once the client kicks in and the client bootstraps, it's going to put this code in, or the same thing for the server. So it's going to know to not run this on the server. If, for example, inside here you have a document dot something. The second thing, and this is kind of a good idea for everyone to do, really, is to use the renderer. So this is typically some Angular code you might see where you have an element reference for something that's on the view, let's say an input, and then you want to, I don't know, change something on that input. You might do something like this name.native element.set attribute, and then change that attribute or set like a focus event or something like that. And this is not going to work on the server because this set attribute is a browser-specific API, which doesn't really exist on the server. So Angular already provides. Yeah.
So when you mean it doesn't work on the server, what happens?
It's completely crashing.
So you don't get any response on the client. You get 500 or something like that. It really
depends how the server is handling that, but yeah, you might get a really broken. Yeah, just string saying the error. It depends how you handle it on the server, but it really crashes on the server.
Okay.
You might have it inside the try catch and then have something else and it might have a difference. Yeah, okay. But it really fails because it's calling a method that just doesn't exist. But Angular provides a renderer which they really advise everyone to use. Even if you're just doing a normal app that will never really work, go through the server, you know it's not going to, but the API looks really similar. You can see this.render.set attribute. So instead of calling set attribute on this element here, you call it on the renderer and you pass the element in, and it's always like this, also for events and things like this. And if you port this, for example, to NativeScript, NativeScript has implementations for all these elements for the whole renderer API. So if at some point, you decide, okay, let's do a NativeScript app, you won't have to really change anything. And it'll work on the server. And whatever they decide to support, you will be safe by using in the renderer. So it's always a good idea, and the API is not that different. Another hot thing that you might run into is dependencies. So you might have an app that depends on services or things that are kind of browser specific, like WebSockets or local storage or things like that don't exist on the server, or you cannot, even if you just want to handle them differently on the server, you can take advantage of dependency injection to solve these cases. So in this case, let's say we want to do like say the to-do list items on local storage or something like that. Local storage only exists on the browser. So on the browser app module, we use this seed ducts for dependency injection, where we provide a name for the provider, and then say use this class, which is the local storage. And on the server, we provide the same class name, but we use a different implementation. So this kind of looks, and on the component, you just use it without caring about the implementation detail. So it's going to be different on the server and on the browser, but for the component, everything stays the same. And this is kind of what it would look like on the implementation. So you have this abstract class, which is the storage. It has two methods, get and set item, and each one will implement its own way. So this one will implement local storage, and this can implement in-memory storage, or using Redis or whatever you are using on the server. This is really useful, and it can be useful for things like, even if you're using Firebase or something like that, because it uses some real-time techniques that don't really work on the server. So you might have the browser have those real-time functionalities with WebSockets, and then on the server, just do HTTP requests, because then that first paint gets painted anyway, and then the browser kicks in, and it becomes the app that you would know. Another one is set timeout, because this rendering on the server is not asynchronous, so set timeout will not really work the way we really expect it to work. The recommendation is to not use it, but it might be that you have to use it. If it makes sense, you can use it inside one of those is browser checks that it will only run on browser. Because on the server, it will really delay the server response, which is something you don't really want. There's one little thing with HTTP that is a little bit weird. By default, the HTTP requests will be made on the client again. So if you have an HTTP request on the server, it fetches the data, but once the client kicks in, it's going to do the request again. There are some GitHub issues for this, and I think the core team is trying to fix this. All the starter kits that you will find, both for Angular 4 and the previous ones, they have some implementations of the HTTP to kind of handle this, but I'm sure this will come from the server module once things become a little bit more stable. Angular CLI, I'm not really familiar with the Angular CLI, but I know I've seen discussions on the universal Slack channel and on the GitHub repositories. They are working on it, so at some point it's going to be as simple as like generate, or what the command is, generate app / universal, and it's going to run, it's going to deliver all this code. At this point, you cannot use the CLI to have universal, but it will be there. All right, so some resources. This is the repository that everyone has been using for Angular 4. It's from Jason Jeans. He works at Forts. So Forts is using Universal already in production. And from what I see, it's running quite well. And this is the starter kit that's really the best way to get started. It's really simple. It does not contain a lot of specific things. So it contains just enough for you to really get started. It contains the Webpack complete, which is nice. Then this is the repository, the Gitter channels. The Gitter or the Slack is typically where you go to ask questions. It's a little bit strange, but you will find more core team members on the Gitter channel than on the Slack, but both places can work. And then the Angular.io docs. They're normally not really up to date with what's going on, but it's again a nice place to work. And yeah, that's what I have. Thank you guys. Thank you. You guys have something? Yeah.
I have a question. You're saying the usefulness of that is for the initial payment only. Does it not render any transition doing yet? Only for the initial?
Yeah. So the performance benefit is for the initial load, because basically the first thing you get from the server is already something. It's already content, and it's already something that the user can see. But there are other requirements you might have. So when I did the first project that I started with Universal, of course I cared about performance. I think everyone should, right? It's good. But I really had other requirements that were important for this. And it was mainly about SEO and the social media aspect of it. So these things can become a little bit tricky to handle. If you want to really go deep into SEO optimization in Angular 1 or Angular 2, it can get really tricky. But these are normally the three main things that you would think about to do universal. And on the performance level, yeah, that's the main. That's the benefit, because the app becomes interactive, becomes like a really live app at the same time. There's no difference there. So if it's the same to have content or to have a loading spinner, yeah, then there's really not a lot of benefit. But typically, you would prefer to have some content presented than just a loading screen.
So the idea is to have the server generating some HTML.
Yes.
Before the single page application starts.
Yes.
To be interactive. So the same thing that normally would be done in the browser, it's made on the server.
Yeah, so the
It's run on the
Part
server
of
and
what's-
generating
yes.
the HTML.
part of what's done in the browser is done on the server. It's
So-
like taking a little bit of the work that the browser is currently doing and doing it on the server.
So if you have another guy that's connected to the server, it needs to be run 100 times in the server, the same code. Or there is some optimization.
Yeah, there's so the server
So
the
server
server
is
implementation that
much
you
more
have.
occupied than serving just.
Yeah, it's serving just static HTML, definitely. That's why there's
Catch the response.
there's some difference. It's not really significant, but when I showed that screen that had the blue bar and the red bar, they were kind of at the same level. The server response where you're doing universal, it might be that it's a little bit more, but typically it's not really a lot. There might be
There is
less
less caching mechanisms.
Yeah,
done
then yeah,
in
the
server
caching in the
side.
server side is normally a little bit better than on the right. It then depends a little bit on what kind of server you're running.
How can the caching on the server if the CD is interactive?
No, but the code is
The code is static. If you don't change the application,
the code is the same.
the first page is always
The data is dynamic, so the HTTP is going to get dynamic data, but the code is it can be cached.
What could be the difference with another solution where the splash view would be produced locally in the browser?
Yes.
And then it's waiting for the server to reply. You already have an image, something that is giving to you the impression that it's working.
Yeah.
And then you see it, you look at it, and then it's coming.
Yeah, definitely. So the Angular team has another package, which is the mobile toolkit, which handles progressive web apps, and it handles the app shell, which is more or less what we're talking about.
Okay.
And it uses universal. So the difference is that locally, when you're running your Webpack bundling or rollup or whatever, it produces this. So it produces this static page, and then the server doesn't have to run anything. You don't have to have Express or anything else. So the solution that handles the app shell for Angular uses universal as well. The difference is that it just renders like the frame more or less. It doesn't render the whole thing. It renders part of the page. So that's like you're saying, you already get like, you might even get a nav bar and you get a sliding menu or something like that. But it's definitely a solution. So also with progressive web apps, this becomes less of a deal. It still becomes a deal because the user comes to the page the first time, it's not going to have anything cached, but after that, the service work is going to be much faster than all of this. It's not even going to.
but for SEO, it's
But for SEO, this is still the way to go if you're doing SEO or social media. And for performance as well, and service workers, they help a lot with this, and the app shell also helps a lot with this. If managing a node server is not really what you want to do, or there's always benefits and drawbacks. But,
In release 4 of Angular, Universal is already integrated.
yes, it's already integrated in the core. And the APIs, I didn't show the previous APIs, obviously, but they were really complicated. It's like, this is, compared to what it was when Angular 2 was released, or it was in RC, and even in final, doing universal was really very, very difficult. Almost nobody was doing it. Now you can really see the difference once the core team adopted it and just cleaned the whole thing up. The API is now something that is relatively easy to use at least.
I remember seeing somewhere, maybe a video, I don't know, they were planning, I don't know if it was already implemented, to cache the user interaction.
Yes.
Between the first display and
Yeah.
bootstrap, and then replay it. It's already.
Yeah, I didn't talk about that. That's called preboot, which is the package that does this. This is so there's this time between the app. So you present the first screen, right? It's painted, but it's not interactive. So once you have a loading screen, you're never going to try to interact with it, right? But if you have a painted screen, you might think, yeah, the app is here, I'm going to start playing with it. But it's not really there, nothing works. So it's a little bit of a weird gap in there, and that's what Preboot tries to handle. So it saves events that the user does. So for example, clicking a button or opening a menu, and once the client finishes Bootstrap, it plays those events. But it has some, so it's not really very easy to use, and it has some,
Yeah, if
you can get into weird edge cases, yeah.
If you click and you don't see.
Also, it doesn't run validation, so it's a little bit, you would try to use it carefully. But it's a good solution, nonetheless. It will become even more.
Depends on the app.
Yeah, it depends.
And when you said it is not supported yet by the Angular CLI to actually implement it, but if you do create a new module manually or via the CLI, does it support with the build?
Yeah, so if you're using the CLI, you will eventually get this for free. So it's a good idea to keep with the CLI, and if it's not a requirement right now, I would say yes, use the CLI at some point. You will just provide some extra parameters to the ng serve, I think it's called, to deploy the app or to run the app, and it's going to provide all the universal support. It's going to create the server module. It's going to do what it needs to do to have this running.
But right now, you would have to create different environments, let's say.
Yeah, like right now,
and export different.
Right now, the CLI just doesn't do it, so it just doesn't exist, the feature yet.
But start with the starter kits.
Yeah, typically we start with the starter kit. The starter kit already has what you need. So the thing is, because everything that's needed is done really high in the level, so above the app module, your whole app remains exactly the same. You don't have to change anything. All the route definitions that you have, all the guards that you have, all the components that you have, unless they are doing what I said, like window.something, that's going to break. But if you just have a simple app, you can just put the extra modules on top and it will work.
Awesome.
Or you can export the CLI configuration, and you get all the files, so you can change them.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
after that, there's no more CLI. So
yeah, I'm not sure if they already have the agents. I'm sure they have. Yes, so you can do that.
you talked about the bottom of one of the slides about providing some help with getting the status of the application from the server to the client. What does it provide there? Or, I mean, you build it on the server, you have a lot of information already on the server. Can you send a page with the information and it just boot with that?
The solution I typically do with that, and this works the same in other frameworks as well, is to use something like Redux or to use something like NGRX, because there it's really easy to save all of that state into one object and then pass only that object. And then on the browser, once you define the NGRX module, you just provide that data as the default, and everything will just work. It's very clean. So what happens there is that the starter kit does this already. On the server, like you're saying, it fetches things from different places, it gets data, so it already has a lot of information in there. So you need to pass that to the client somehow. What it does is it puts that object of data as a string in the HTML itself, and then the client picks that and bootstraps on that data.
Okay.
So for example, if you have on the server an HTTP that gets, I don't know, to-dos, and then on the client, it already has the to-dos, it's not going to fetch it again. It's just, yes, I have the to-dos there. It just bootstraps with the data already.
Okay.
So yes, Redux or NGRX is typically to handle that.
Okay. Anyone else?
Yeah, you can ask me anything.
Have you been playing with the version 4?
Yes, mainly because of this. So I was just using the regular version, the regular Angular 2. But the API changes on the universal are really significant. So I really started using Angular 4 before it was, so it was in RC. But the API was so clean and I knew that it was going to be released 1 month later or something, that I started playing with it. Because the difference from universal in the 4.x to the 2.x is really, really big. Like previously it was really a lot of files involved, a lot of changes involved to making an app universal compatible. And with Angular 4 it's just one extra module. So.
There are other differences?
In Angular itself, no, I don't think so. There's nothing significant there. No. You would upgrade your app easily. Also because the deprecation from in Angular now works in a way that is, at least it gives you some time to take care of it. So everything that's going to be removed, it has a 6 month gap, a 6 months deprecation time. So at least you have 6 months to take care of it. They deprecated some APIs, but it's not something that everyone, I think, would use.
What is the roadmap for Angular 5, 6, and 7?
They release every 6 months.
Yes, there will be new releases, that's for sure. I don't know what the roadmap is, what the actual features are. I know for things like, for example, the material, it doesn't support universal. So one of the big things on the roadmap for material is to support universal. Because it really does this window dot something, because they do some kind of magic in there to, to do some animations and things, and it doesn't really work on the server, so they're working on doing that. But for Angular it's not.
Okay, I guess we're done.